from India and South Asia. The format of the session is going to be, we'll each give a short presentation. If there's overlap in our slides, we'll probably skip through it, but then we'll try to move directly into a panel discussion. So it'll be good for all of you to pipe up and ask for disconfirming evidence or ask our perspectives on this. So with that being said, I'm Ben Shaw. I'm Director of Global Advisory for WAN-IFRA. I'm based in Frankfurt. And then I'm going to be joined by Swapnil Srivastava, Vice President of Ad Tech for Times Internet of India. And then Anita Nayar, CEO of Havas Media Group in India and South Asia. They'll each give a short presentation. We won't break for questions between each of those. And then we'll move into a panel discussion. So without further ado, we'll run through my slides real quick. We'll talk about what is ad blocking, who's doing it, how are companies around the world reacting to it, and what I see as some industry priorities for you publishers in the room, and then talk about some suggestions we have for publishers. So how many of you in the room have ever used an ad blocker, or do you use an ad blocker? Come on, you can tell us. Yeah, okay. So there's a fair amount of understanding about what it is. Is anybody in the room tracking how many of your readers are ad blocking today? We have one, and he's a speaker. Okay, good. So we'll move through my slides and get on to our speakers real quickly. So if you are unaware of what ad blocking is, the picture of the center there is a web browser. And when you go to a page, you go to hindustantimes.com, the content is loaded from a web server. But the advertising ecosystem, as you all know, is a very complex animal. And the ads, because of how programmatic works and the different ad servers, are generally loaded off of a different server than your web server. So you go to the web page, the content loads, then the ads load. If somebody has an ad blocker active, then the ads can't reach the page. Now, some people do it because they think it's annoying. Some people do it because they think the advertisers are prying into their privacy. Some people do it because they want to save money on data. But a lot of people are beginning to exercise control over their display ad experience by using these ad blockers, which for a publisher that doesn't have a really strong paid content subscription model or strong native advertising model, this could be a real problem very quickly. There's an example of how ad blocking, when it's activated, could look. It's not just display ads, it's also video ads. Ad blockers have been available on Android for a while, but the problem is primarily a desktop-based problem. But now Apple's started allowing ad blockers on their platform, and that was one of the things last fall and into this winter that gave people some pause. They were concerned that this would be a real issue. Adobe released a report last year with a company called PageFair that said that over 200 million people are blocking ads worldwide. The highest place, well, let's see, the global average for a news site is about 10% of your audience is blocking ads. This is according to the Adobe and PageFair work. That's not too bad, but we just had, last week, we had something called our Ad Blocking Action Day in Frankfurt for concerned European publishers coming to it. And we had publishers from Germany and Belgium and Norway that all said that they're seeing some of their sites, usually these are niche sites, but some of their sites are blocked at 40 to 50% of their users are blocking all the ads. And that takes a ton of inventory off the table for you to monetize. So in India, according to this report, there's about 4.4 million people using ad blockers. That's a small percent still, but it is a quickly growing figure. Bangladesh, small numbers. Nepal, small numbers. Australia has about the same number as India, so the percentage is much higher in when you get into Commonwealth countries and then into US and Europe. Another reason to be concerned is, has anybody ever used the UC browser at all? Yeah, okay, got some UC browsers. There are browsers that are coming online now that block ads by default, that just block your ads as part of the experience. And worryingly enough, in the Caribbean, there's a cell phone provider that's blocking ads, they're called Digicel, that's blocking ads at the telco level, that people that are using their network will not see your ads. Of course, there's legal challenges to all these in many countries. Unsurprisingly, I think, the surveys that we've seen show that it's younger males and younger females that are doing most of the ad blocking. And we think, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, that advertising really fueled the growth of the internet for the first 20 years. But as the demand that our publishers have put on the growth of digital revenue has increased, we've ended up putting more and more advertising on our sites instead of finding new models. And that's often led to a deterioration in the ad experience. You get the big hand jumping out or the thing going down, and eventually people start getting tired of it. So the more and more aggressive the tech companies became and advertising models became, the lower people's tolerance was. And unlike a skippable video pre-roll, people don't really have a lot of control over that ad experience when they're on your site. So some would say that this is an outgrowth of people wanting to exercise that control over their ad experience, and they're just blocking it outright. The danger here is if you don't provide a better ad experience and you find different ways to make money on your sites, then you're going to create a vacuum for the large tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, to come in and really set the rules for how people pay for content or how content's monetized. And that could be an issue. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It does to me. It sounds like what happened to the music industry in the early 2000s. I think you're in a very similar position as publishers in the music industry were. Back then, music labels like today's publishers weren't able to present their listeners with an attractive transaction. When they failed to offer that to the consumers refused to pay for it, resorted to piracy. Now, we know, we all went through years, oh, people won't pay for content online, people won't pay for music. Well, guess what? There's very wealthy companies making money on music online today. Spotify, Pandora, Apple, all those, there is a ton of money being made on paid content with music. It's just not the music labels. It's large tech companies that were able to offer a good transaction. So users rebelled, they refused to pay for it, music industry lost control. I think you're in a very similar spot, and here in India, I think you're in an excellent spot to get out ahead of what is going to become a dangerous trend for us. So, how are companies reacting? A lot of companies that I talk to are still actually not doing anything about it. Some are paying to be unblocked. One of the ad models that companies like AdBlock Plus and some of the other big ad blockers has is not empowering users. It's basically extortion. They say, if you want your ads to be shown to your readers, you have to pay us to be whitelisted. And I think that's probably a bad path to go down, but some publishers are going down that path. A lot of people right now are at the stage that Swapnil is, that they're tracking it. They're seeing what sort of impact is really going to eventually come out of this and formulating a strategy. We've had a number of publisher roundtables internationally in London and Paris and in Dublin and in Hamburg actually, and everybody that has asked nicely or they start detecting if somebody's using an ad blocker, they detect and they say, hey, whitelist us, please. There's a link between good quality advertising and good content. They said it's been a waste of time, basically, that it hasn't really worked for them. The most successful companies that are dealing with this right now are sort of asking firmly. There's a number of people that say, you know, hey, we've detected an ad blocker. You got to either whitelist us to see any of the content, or you can pay for a subscription model, which is the next one, that you don't have to see ads, but you got to pay us to see those ads. Another thing that companies are doing is tech escalation. There's companies out there that say, hey, we'll show you how to show an ad forcibly to somebody. The reason I would say that you might want to take a cautious approach to that is because that leads to a cat and mouse game. There's already plugins out there that say, okay, hide me from the ad blocking detectors, and back and forth, and eventually our readers are served more poorly. There's an example from Bild in Germany. You can see that they detected my ad blocker. You got to test what you're doing there. And it says, you can no longer attend Bild. Disable it now or start paying. And that is having a good impact so far. So from my standpoint at WAN-IFRA, or my advisory team's standpoint, we see 3 priorities. And just briefly, the first is you've got to get out ahead of this issue and improve the overall ad experience for users without ad blockers. You have to improve the ad experience so they don't want to resort to using ad blockers. The trick is that you don't want to educate them about ad blockers while you're doing it, because there's probably a number of people in your audience who would love nothing more than to block your ads. So you want to very carefully talk about that link between good quality advertising and content. Secondly, if you are tracking who's using ad blockers, we really encourage people to experimenting with ways to monetize them or to get them to come back to you. You have a zero risk opportunity here that they're already blocking you, so you've got plenty of room to work with them. They're already gone. And then third, I would say that you really want to look at mobile-ready advertising opportunities. We've heard a lot about these different opportunities over the last couple of days, but you really want to look at diversifying the way that you make money from your websites away from display. So those are the 3 sort of important points or priorities that we would say. If publishers allow the technology platform companies to become the gatekeepers of news and content, as Apple became for music, then your trusted brands, your most precious asset, is going to be reduced to a commodity. And that, I think, is bad not only for your companies, but I think is really bad for democracy. This is a challenge to your business model. So I think in the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this survey that we did, but I will say that WAN-IFRA is taking a very active role in this. We've launched an entire resource center that you can go to the website right now, download all the presentations from our ad blocking action day. You can see in-depth reviews. You can watch webinars from the keynote yesterday, Mr. Peterson. One of his leads on ad blocking at VG gave us a wonderful webinar on the subject, and we're really focusing on that this year. And we've also created an international task force that is going to publish a report on it this spring. So that's what we're doing at WAN-IFRA. Let me just get through this. I would say that my suggestion to you as a publisher in the room is think about starting to track it. If you're not sure how to track it, there's ways that you can do it in Google Analytics, and there are a lot of companies out there like PageFair, C-Sense, and others that are willing to put a little tag on your site and track it for you for free. But there are ways that you can do it. And then consider ways of experimenting with users who are already ad blocking. Focus on branded content and other mobile-friendly revenue. I don't think branded content is a one-to-one solution for ad blocking, but it's a really quickly growing way to diversify those revenue sources. And then lastly, focus on a really good mobile experience. make sure that your site is loading well, make sure that it's friendly to people, because your audience is going over there, and you need those audience eyeballs to get the dollars eventually. So those would be my suggestions for you. And then I'll just leave you with that. I think that you publishers need to take the lead on this and not wait for the ad tech companies to come in and set the rules. That you need to help save the mechanism of advertising that supports content on the open web. So please do take the lead. We've got a couple of great presentations coming up, and then we'll have some open discussion here in a minute. So thank you very much. And first up is Swapnil Srivastava. He's Vice President of Ad Tech for Times of India Internet Limited. He's currently heading Ad Tech and is responsible for building a world-class ad tech strategy. Prior to joining Times, he had started 2 ventures of his own. One was sold to Exponential Tribal Fusion, and the other was backed by Intel Capital. So Swapnil, welcome to the stage, and we look forward to hearing what you have.
Thank you, Ben. Just give me a second while I set this up. Thank you all. It's a real pleasure being here with you guys. Just a very brief intro. Like Ben mentioned, I look at ad tech for Times Internet, and it's been a real interesting past 2-3 years since we set up the whole stack. We started with pretty much an ops organization. Now we built what we call Columbia, and we'll talk a little bit later about that. The whole concept of ad blockers is sort of a new one. I mean, since last year, like Usman was mentioning, it's trying to become more and more critical to our thought process. So before we start, and some of the slides would be a repeat of what Anita and Ben would have, so I'll try to be fast around it. How many of you guys are worried about ad blocker? I use the word worried. Anyone? 2? Okay, great. That's good news. Now the stats are interesting. Like what Ben mentioned earlier, we have 200 million users actively using ad blockers right now from PageWare. This is 2015 June, I think, is this data. So I wouldn't be surprised if the number is more closer to like 230 or 240 million right now. What is more interesting is the rate at which it is escalating. And that is a little bit of a concern to a publisher like us, and I'm sure to a lot of you guys as well. If you see the last maybe 2 years from 2013 mid, it has been escalating at a very, very fast pace. And 2015 had a 41% global year-on-year growth. So that's a massive sort of a breakout of ad blocking in some sense. 22 billion was lost in revenue. Now that's nearly, what is it, like 17-18% of total digital ad revenue in 2015. It's projected to be 41 billion in 2016 as per PageWare. 41 billion is closer to, I think, 22, 23, 24% of total ad revenue. And this is a global number, so this is not a US number. Obviously, US and Europe is much worse. We've been in sort of secluded, this part of the world, thankfully, blissfully unaware in some sense, happy in the fact that a lot of people are not aware of a lot of these ad blockers and the tools that are available to people. But before we do that, let me just quickly talk about how ad blocker works, and Ben has covered most of it. I just want to just at a high level cover the mechanics, right? So one is obviously, like we all know, the asset blocking, which is the site loads up, like what was mentioned earlier, the ad server comes up, it gets blocked. The other aspect is element hiding. Some guys who cannot block it from loading the ad per se, basically say, oh, here's a div, I will hide it. So that's called element hiding. It's more for the geeky details, but it is just interesting how these guys work. The other, which is actually getting more and more worrisome, like was also mentioned earlier, was the telco level blocking. And we'll cover that just in a little bit. The other aspects are DNS level hacking, hardware devices, which is more enterprise play. So if you have a large company, they put a box at the router level, and everything gets blocked. So even at the enterprise level, like if you go to any of the big corporations, you will see ad blocking very, very prevalent. And those are heavy users, and they are sort of guys who've been spending a lot, so that matters. Now the other aspect is these are all open source softwares. So you can actually go and download AdBlock Plus source code and look for yourself how they do it. So thankfully there is no magic to it, there is no intellectual property to it, it's actually open source. Where the trick comes is the easy list, the crowdsourced list of sites, domains, regular expressions which are technical phrase for how the ad div would look like. They are maintained by thousands and thousands of people, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, and they are the real meat around how ad blocking actually is evolved. Because the ad blocking software actually just looks at that list and blocks these things up. So even if when people specifically do deals with ad blockers, and like what Ben mentioned, they pay millions of dollars and get away from it, some other new guy comes up and say, hey, I don't agree to this, I will still block you. So it's a complete waste of money for some of these guys who are paying millions of dollars to AdBlock Plus, saying, okay, let me somehow circumvent this whole thing, and then some new guy, you block, origin, whatever, some new guy comes up and says, hey, I don't care about that, I have not been paid, so I'll still block you. So this whole circle is sort of going in a very fast pace, in sort of a open source, crowdsourced, almost like a, I don't want to say the word virus because in some sense it's useful for the consumer, but it is spreading beyond the control of large organizations. Now, it will get worse. And you know, at least I am more technologist than a business salesperson. We go down into the details of how this works. I think we are sitting on a much bigger upside of ad blockers in the next year or two, even more than what we've seen in the last year. And there are a few reasons, some of which were covered earlier. Mobile is yet to join the party. As you can see on the bottom left, 2% of mobile is ad blocked. 98% of, so ad blocking as the total number of users, 98% are on desktop, 2% are on mobile. Now we are all aware, and like in the previous sessions, the entire user experience is moving to mobile. I mean, India is a mobile first country already. I mean, we have more mobile users than I think most of the countries' populations of rest of the world. That 2% reaching a 10% or 20% will create a massive upheaval in terms of the revenue loss for publishers. iOS 9 obviously is coming on board. Samsung has announced something that they will also enable, so that will trigger some of it. The other reasons are telcos, like I mentioned. So Shine, the company in Israel which does this deal with Digicel and all that, they are saying that there's a lot of new telcos are coming on board. So it could be, think of it someday, and God forbid, if Reliance says we'll block at telco level, our revenues will become like a fourth of what they are today. And that's a massive pain point that we may look at in the next year. The other aspect I want to bring to your attention, and which is almost overlooked most of the time for people who are tracking it, which is already a small set, is most of the ad blocking is actually underreported. For example, you know, one of the ad blockers you block would block analytics tags as well. So when somebody is tracking how much of your user is ad blocked, they're comparing the analytics number and the ad server numbers. Well, guess what? Even the analytics numbers got blocked. So you are not really getting the full picture of what's going on. So even though a lot of people are saying it's 2% or 3% in India, I wouldn't be surprised if it is much bigger. It's more like a 4 or 5%. I mean, we track numbers as high as 7% on certain occasions. So this is something to be at least kept in mind. The other aspect, and which Ben also mentioned earlier, is the business around ad blocks, right? So people are paying millions of dollars to whitelist them with AdBlock Plus and some of these guys, and then the new guy comes in and says, well, I don't care, you still haven't paid me. Or some guys are genuinely nice. They say, no, we don't want any money. We just want the users to have a better experience. So it's a very tricky situation, but hundreds of millions of dollars, as is the sort of grapevine, are being exchanged to whitelist themselves. The other is telcos, when they are looking at ad blocking, some of these telcos are starting to feel this is a great revenue opportunity. They're saying, why should a Google and a publisher and ad network keep all the ad money? We want in too. So they are negotiating with some of the ad blockers saying, okay, we will block at the telco level, but then whitelist certain other guys. So in some sense, you may think the discourse is now moving away from should we block ads for better user experience, as it is moving to a fact that, well, you've been making money all this time, guess what, we want in too. And that's a very dangerous proposition, because this suddenly changes the whole dynamics of how we've been operating. We've been typically working with a ad network, a publisher, and then the advertiser, and now we got third and fourth and fifth entities coming in the middle. Some of the other new guys, which are browsers, like was also mentioned earlier, Brave, another new browser, they're saying, well, guess what, we will ad block, but I'll switch the ads with my ads. So suddenly, what is happening now is they are changing the complete table upside, on the other side, they're saying, well, we don't care about your ads, we want our ads. So now the publishers don't know how to react to that, because for that browser, and if it becomes millions of downloads and whatever the numbers that we're looking at, suddenly the whole revenue share dynamics will change. So these are some of the things to be at least aware of. I'm not saying that there are great solutions available today, and how things evolve over the next couple of years is anybody's guess, really. But it's something that we can't really ignore as a fact. Now, before we go into the strategy of how to deal with this, and we will in the next slide, I just want to understand, that we, at least as publisher group, we are aware why it is happening, right? I mean, so at the end of the day, user is saying, well, you guys have been ruthless in terms of how many ads per page, the impact advertising and all of that stuff you've been throwing at me for the last few years. So what is it that the user really wants? So, I mean, we are all aware that they want a better user experience, and we've been a little greedy sometimes. We've been throwing too many ads or too many flashy ads. That is one part of it. The other part is, which is how I think Facebook Instant Article, for example, is coming at it. They're saying the user really also cares about latency. So if the page loads in like a second versus 9 seconds, it's everything in the world to the end user. Especially true when you're on mobile. I mean, people on mobile have a much shorter attention span. The whole world is moving into the news in short sort of a model. We are on the wrong side of the generation, right? I mean, we've been reading this big ass newspapers and then, crazy long articles. And now the next generation is reading 50 characters, 100 characters, and they can't wait 5 seconds or 6 seconds for the damn page to load, because there are 35 scripts on the back end. So you have the Facebook Instant Articles that is coming at all of us in a big way. We have the Google News, we have the Apple News, we have a lot of aggregators who are coming saying no ads, just news. Very important aspect for us to keep in mind as we go about doing our day jobs. The other part is data usage, which is related, but when you have a page which has 30 tags, the data size is now 3 times of the total article size per se. What that means is some guy, especially in this part of the world where, paying for data counts, that's a lot of money that is coming out of the consumer pockets to pay for showing ads. This is a theme that is going to gain major attention when the ad blockers come to India and this part of the world in a big way. They're saying, guess what, it's not just about even latency or the user experience, it's about real money you're paying to see ads. That's going to resonate very, very strongly with the next generation. And that's where that 2% number that we saw on mobile, if it gets to 30-40%, that the scale at which the lost revenue for us is going to be growing is much beyond what we may have imagined. The other is data privacy. Thankfully, India has been sort of okay and we don't care sort of if anybody steals our data sort of attitude, which is surprising, but we've lived with it. But at least globally, that's been a big aspect as well. So it's also a prerogative for the publishers to go out, communicate to the consumers and the users that we do care about your privacy and we will take care of it. I think it's very important before we build our strategies as a publisher to think through why this is happening. It's like a nature's way of reacting to what's been going on. So I think ad blocker is more of a reaction than something that's been thrust upon and we need to now figure out what to do about it. And the reason are these. Okay, so the current publisher strategies, and clearly it's a cat and mouse game that we are all playing right now. Paywall, which I think is still reasonable. It's not, at least for say Times Internet, it would be still a stretch to to impose that. I mean, you know, we do 150 million users, we do 15 billion ad impressions a month. It's at